Alright, so let's start creating our to-do list. Open your terminal and use npm create with latest and add a dot in the final, so it's going to install everything in the current directory. We're going to select Vue and use JavaScript. And now we can just use npm install to install all of the dependencies. And finally use the npm run dev so we can see it in our browser. There we go. So now you can see a basic app from Vue. We don't want all of this, so we're going just to delete it. So first go to src and delete everything that is inside of here. And then go to app and delete everything and just leave a template tag on here with a h1 saying hello world like this. And then you can go to components and delete this component because you're not going to use it. There we go. So now you can see a basic app on here. So now you can go to my profile on GitHub and access the repository tab. The link will be on the description. You access the to-do list view YouTube right here, where we have the project. And now you can go to src and now you can go to app.view and copy everything that is inside of here and go to style in our app and add everything on here. So this is just basically to save time. Our main goal is not CSS. Our main goal is to learn how Vue works. The link to my repository will be on the description. So now back to our app, and as you can see we have a style tag and a template tag. One more thing is missing, is the script tag. So use the setup thing on here so we can use the composition API. Okay, so let's start by the HTML. We can start by creating a div where we're going to add a class of app. Inside of this app, we're going to create another div, and inside of this div, we're going to create a form. And this form is not going to have any actions, and it's going to have a class of form container like this. And then a div inside of the form that is going to have a class of input container like this. So as the name says, we're going to have some inputs inside of this container. So let's just create an input right here. There's going to have the type of text and also a class of input text. If everything is right, you should be seeing a nice look input right here. But the only problem is this input is not getting the value that is inside of it. For this, we can create a variable here. This variable I'm going to name text. This is going to start empty. And make sure to import the ref from Vue. If you don't know what ref is, it's just basically a function that is coming from Vue that every time that this variable changes, the HTML is re-rendered. So let's try to get the value inside of this input. So I want to, every time that I write something inside of the input, to get the event and then set the text as the e.target.value. And I also want to set the value of this input as text. So now let me just use the double curly braces to append a variable inside of the HTML, and let me say text. And now if I write something on here, you should be seeing this reflected on the right side, but this is not a good way to do it. We can, instead of using value and input event, we can use vmodel. If you use vmodel, this is basically the same, but we can just use this in one line, a much cleaner way to do it. So if I refresh, and you should be seeing the same result, but with a cleaner code. There we go. So now we are able to get the text value. So let me create another variable. In this variable, I'm going to give the name of isDone. This is going to be for the checkbox. And this is going to start with the value of false. So this, we're going to create another input right here. So let me just copy and paste it on here. And this input is going to have the type of a checkbox like this, the class of checkbox, finally the vmodel of is done. There you go. So if I refresh, you should be seeing the two inputs right here. So we are done with the input container. Now we're going to create another container that's going to be not input container, but select container. So say select container like this. And inside of this container is going to have a select, of course. So create a select right here, which we're going to provide some options. So let's start with one option right here. And this option is going to be work and have the value of work. Copy this one and change to school. In here, school. So this is going to be basically the categories of our tasks. But currently we don't have a way to get the value inside of this select. We can do this by creating a new reference that's going to be category. This category is going to start with empathy. And I want to, every time that I change this input right here, I get the event. So I can set the category of e.target.value like this. In that way, we can get the value of our task. And finally, we can create a button right here. This button is where we can add a task. So let me say a task like this. And there we go. You see a nice looking button on here. So if I write something, if I add a task, you see that nothing happens. This is because we didn't add the functionality yet. So I want to, every time that I submit, so I can use the event of submit, I call a function that is add task. And of course, this function is not created yet. We're going to create this function right now. So create a function named add task like this. And I also want to, every time that I submit, I don't reload, because if I add a task, you see that it's reloading. I don't want this. So I can use the prevent thing on here. So this is not going to trigger a reload. If I add a task, you see that nothing happens. So let's start creating our task. The first thing that I want to check is if the text has a value, because I don't want to add a task without a text. So we can make an if statement here, where we can select the text. And if the text don't have a value, so I can use this operator right here, I'm going to return. I'm using this because if I return the thing that is below of here, it's not going to be rendered. But I cannot use text because, let me console log it. Okay, if I write something on this input, if I click add task, we don't get what we expect. What we get is an object, and this object has a lot of properties. But the main thing is that we have a value. Inside of this value, we get the exact value that we write on this input. So every time that we use a ref, we don't just use the text as a way to get the value. We have to use the text dot value. So if I write something over here, now you can see the plain value and not an object. So that's why here I'm going to use if text dot value, that I want basically to check if we don't have anything inside of the text dot value. I'm just going to return that. Then the function is going to end right here. And what happens if we do have a value? We can create a new task. So I'm going to create const new task like this. This is going to be an object. Inside of this object is going to have a text. And the text is going to be equal to text.value. And then we're going to have ID. That's going to be equal to math.random, just to have some random ID. And finally, we're going to have the is done that is going to be set as the is done.value. And finally, the category of our task. This is going to be the category dot value. Don't forget to use the value. And now let me just see if we get the task. So let me console log the new task. Let me refresh and let's create a new task. So let me say make a video. I set this to school, and if I add the task, now you can see a new task here. We have the category of school, the ID that is random, the is done that is false, and the text as make a video. So let me say edit a video and set this as done and to work. Now you can see the category of work, the ID of a random number, and the is done as true, and the text as edit a video. So everything is working. So every time that we add a task, I don't want to always clear the input by myself. So if I add a task, the value of the text is still here. So we can use the text.value to empty. In that way, every time that I add a task, the value disappears. There we go. So now we have to store this task in somewhere. We can create a new console right here. This is going to be tasks. We're going to use the ref and set this to array. I'm using a ref because I want to, every time that this changes, the HTML will be re-rendered. So now I can use the tasks dot value. Don't forget to use the value. And then we can use the push because that's array. And now we can add a new task right here. There we go. So now we have a new task in our task array. And let me just console log to make sure that this is inside of the tasks. Let me refresh. Let me say hello world, set to school, and done. And now you see the object that we don't want to see. What we want to see is the value of this object. Let me say hello world again, set to selected and school. And now you can see a proxy, but don't worry about it. But here inside, you can see the value. That is the new task. All right, but of course I don't want to see my task on the console. I want to see my task right here. To do this, you're going to the form, and then below the form you have the div. Below this div, we're going to create a new div, and this div is going to have the class of tasks container, where we're going to put all of our tasks. And inside of the task container, we can create another div that's going to have a special property that is the v-for. Just like on JavaScript, we can use v-for inside of HTML because we are using Vue. So basically, I want to get the task in tasks. So basically, if we have, for example, 5 tasks inside of the text array, this is going to have 5 divs. So let me just say something like A, and let me add a new task right here. And now you can see 3 A's right here because we have 3 items inside of our task array. But I can use a better thing. I can write the text. So let me just start by creating a div and add a class of task container like this. Inside of this container, we're going to have the P. And inside of this looping, we have access to the task. So we can use the task.text because we have access to it, because we are inside of the div that is using the v-for. So now if I add a new task right here, you see a new task down here. So as I'm writing new tasks and they are right here, that means that that's working. There we go. I don't want just the text, I want other things. For example, I want to delete or update the text. So I'm going to create a new div right here that's going to have the actions container class. That's where we're going to create all of our actions. So let's create a button, and inside of this button we can say X like this, so we can delete. So if we click right here, let me just refresh, you see that if we click, nothing happens because we didn't add the functionality yet. But first, let me style this button. I'm going to use a class of btn delete. There we go. So now our button is looking much better. Now we can use a event of click. So basically I want to, every time that I click on this button, something happens. And I want to call a function named remove task. This function is not created yet, so let's just create it. So let me say const remove task. Okay. So now I can add a new task right here, but if we click, still not being deleted. But we have to make a way to know which task we want to delete. So for example, if I have 1 here and 2 here, if I want to delete the 2, I have to make sure this is the 2 that I'm deleting. I can do this with the identifier that in this case is the ID. The ID is unique. So as I'm inside of the V form here, I have access to the task. So now I can say task dot ID. So I'm passing the task ID inside of the remove task function. So now inside of this function, I can receive the ID just like this. Okay, and now I can create a new variable. This is going to be called filtered list. As the name says, we're going to use a filter. So we can get the original task list. There's the tasks, use the value, and then the filter method. So let's say task, use arrow function, say task ID is not equal to ID. So if you don't know what filter does, it basically filters the array. So I'm mapping to every task. So if we have 3 tasks, it's going to render this function 3 times. So it's going to go to every task. And if the task.id is not equal to the ID that we have on here, then this task is going to go to the filtered list. But we don't want the filtered list. What we want is the task value. So I can say task value is equal to filtered list like this. So now if I create something on here, if I create another one, you can see that we have the 2 tasks right here. If I click on this one, this is deleted. Nice, that means that this is working. But let's say that I want to update the task. I want to use another name on here. Well, this is going to be another action from our actions container. So we can set the function to be update task, and we have to pass the task ID so we know which task we are updating. And inside of X, I'm going to use the update right here. Paste this, and finally I'm going to use the update class right here, so it has another looking. So now we have to create the update function. So let me say const update task, and as you know, we have an ID being passed here, so we can receive this ID like this. So update task. Okay, so to get the value of our new task, we're going to use the prompt. So I can say new task text is equal to a prompt that has a value of new text. value. There we go. So every time that I create a task, and if I click on this button right here, a new prompt is triggered. And here we can write the new text value. So if I write something, this don't really changes because we didn't add the functionality yet. So what I want to do is to map to the text value this and get the task like this, and I want to see if the task.id is equal the ID that is passed on here. If it is, I'm going to get the task text. It has the same ID to be the new task text, which we get from the prompt. And finally, I'm going to return this text. And finally, I'm going to return the task. There we go. So if I create a new task, I want to update, say hello, and we have here the new value. If that's a little bit confusing, don't worry, just practice a little bit more and you'll be able to understand everything. That's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.